Hello and welcome to Tea with Tolkien, an online community for the Hobbit at heart. We are inspired by the works, life, and Catholic faith of J.R.R. Tolkien and strive to encourage others towards a deeper love and understanding of Tolkien's legendarium by hosting a free book club, providing free resources, and by cultivating a vibrant and positive community online. Today, I am extremely nervous to share a general recap of my thoughts and experience with The Rings of Power Season 1. It's been a little over 6 months since the finale premiered, and some of you know that I had a baby 2 days before the finale aired. So it's been a very crazy 6 months for me as I've wanted to spend time with my baby and spend time with my family, but I've also really been processing everything that's happened within the show, my whole experience with it. So I just wanted to finally sit down and share my thoughts. I'm sure my thoughts are going to change as time goes by, so I just want to preface it by saying, don't take it too seriously. Don't get mad. This isn't a big deal. A lot of people have had the impression that this show is something so massively high stakes and that if you disagree with each other on it, like it's the end of the world, you can't be friends anymore. This is going to be my personal experience. It's going to be different than yours because, I'm a different person than you. But this is just what it is. I don't know. If you're still listening, that's great. I want to begin also by prefacing this and saying that I'm not a film critic or a media critic, and these are all my own personal thoughts. I know more about Tolkien lore than I do about the mechanics of filmmaking or about the behind the scenes of television production, so I might be speaking from a place of ignorance when it comes to those sorts of things. If you disagree with me, that's fine. I might even be wrong at times, and I welcome respectful criticism. There's not a lot that I have to say that hasn't already been said about the series since the finale wrapped about 6 months ago, but I did want to share my own experiences and thoughts, if nothing more than for posterity, because it's always kind of fun to reflect on things like this anyways, and I've really enjoyed The Rings of Power, and I'm still enjoying talking about it 6 months later. I also wanted to mention that I have just finished leading a book club on the Fall of Numenor with the Tea with Tolkien community. So a lot of the events and themes of the Second Age are really fresh in my mind, and I think that's really enriched my experience of the show. And I am glad that I've finished reading that book before I sat down to write out my review and to record it. Over 1,000 people participated in this book club, so that was really exciting. And I do wonder if we've seen a big revitalization of the Tolkien community because of the show. I'm sure there's some kind of relation here. I'm not sure how direct, but I think that's really cool. And I'm really grateful for all of the support that we've had. We'll be reading The Lord of the Rings together as a group beginning in June, so if you're interested in joining our free book club, you can learn more about that at teawithtolkien.com/book-club. I'm also really glad that I waited to pull this review together because the more time that passes, the more I feel like I get where they are going. I had a lot of big opinions when the show was airing, and a lot of the times as soon as an episode would end, I would be super mad on Twitter, or super excited, this is perfect or I hated this. But the more time that passes, the more I'm just like, I want to see where this goes. I'm curious. This is obviously not something written by Tolkien himself. This is a new take on the story being told by these showrunners and by all of the really amazing, talented writers and cast members and everyone working on the show. You can tell it's something made with a lot of love. There are still elements that annoy me or things I personally would have done differently, but overall, I'm just really happy to be along for the ride and curious to see what comes next for The Rings of Power. Like, I know they're working on season 2 right now. I know there are going to be a lot of really devastating things happening because I've been kind of following all the leaks and the spoilers, but I'm just happy to be here. I guess that's all I would like to say. But in terms of the show itself, I feel like this is a show that's meant to be mulled over. It's not really your typical binge series. And unfortunately, I do think this led to them losing a lot of people along the way, but I feel like that's kind of the way it works with Tolkien too. I think it's something that's meant to be a contemplative story, something that blooms along the way as you kind of grow along with it. So as I've had 6 months to mull over things and think things through, I do feel like my opinion of it has softened. My experience with the series has been way different than with any other sort of Tolkien-derived or related media because of my involvement with the marketing of the show. So if you don't already know, Last year, I was invited to a special sneak peek of the series in London, and then I also attended a luncheon with the cast in San Diego at Comic-Con, as well as a special screening of the first 2 episodes in New York City. So I've had kind of a higher level of involvement than I ever expected to have with the show. It's definitely way different than how I have experienced the Peter Jackson movies. So it's been difficult to separate my experience of these events related to the series from like the actual episodes I'm watching at home. But that's not necessarily something I want to do because it has emphasized for me the human element of this production. Having connected with the people who are both behind the scenes crafting the new version of Middle-earth, as well as the actors we're seeing on the screen, has done nothing but enrich my experience of watching the actual finished product. I won't be able to know how I might have felt about the series if I hadn't been given these opportunities and experiences, so there's not a lot of sense in trying to imagine that, in my opinion, but I've never been asked to hold back from sharing my honest opinion, and I haven't done so. It's important to me when speaking about my thoughts on the series to be very straightforward about my involvement and the fact that I do feel it colored my reception of season 1. In my opinion, everyone's personal experiences are going to color their reception of anything. I think that's just life. As an example, my interpretation of Maxim Baldry's Isildur is going to be colored by a conversation that I had with him at Comic-Con, where he seemed to be really genuinely interested in listening to mine and all of our concerns and fears about the show. I have a really deep respect for a lot of the cast members because it is just so clear that they also really love Tolkien and they want the show to be done well. These experiences that I've had have added a really human element to how I'm experiencing. Gosh, I've said experiencing like 800 times, but they've added a human element to how I see the show and how I can kind of see past the screen and feel more immersed in this story as a production. That being said, I do want to try to talk about the actual episodes more than anything because I think that's kind of the most important thing when you're talking about a production. Like, this is the final product. This is how we're going to judge it moving forward. The easiest way to begin any review, I think, is with the highlights. And all of these elements have already received so much praise that I don't feel like I need to dwell on them for too long, but I do want to bring them up. It seems extremely plain that everyone involved in this show has put so much of their heart into it, and that's something I'm really grateful for. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who worked on this season, from the stunt workers to the makeup artist, effects, writing team, directing, acting. They have really created something so immersive and so large scale in the midst of the earliest days of the pandemic, and I think that's really an accomplishment that they should all be proud of. So thank you if any of you are listening. I don't know if you are. In particular, I want to highlight the visuals. From the prosthetics and makeup, set design, costuming, visual effects, this entire show is breathtaking. It truly felt like being back in Middle-earth, both in the sense that it felt congruent with a lot of what Peter Jackson has laid as a foundation with his trilogy, and because it felt so much like the world that I really fell in love with when I was reading Tolkien. To put it simply, seeing the 2 trees of Valinor on screen is an experience that I never thought I would have in my lifetime. Like, from the very first promotional shot to the prologue in episode 1, it still brings me to tears every time I see it. And like, what a gift. It just feels like a gift. I also felt the same way about seeing Numenor for the first time. Like, it's just breathtaking. The knowledge that this was something crafted with so much care and so much love and so much time and effort, I really, really appreciate it. I also want to highlight the music. Bear McCreary's score is just a work of genius, and the way that he was able to create so many different distinct themes for different characters and regions, and also blend them together to create different moments and different evoke different emotions in the audience throughout the season. Like, it was just incredibly impressive. Characterization. Every major cast member seems to have put so much thought and research into their character. I want to highlight in particular Sauron, Elendil, Pharazôn, Galadriel, and Elrond. Now, in the appendices to The Fall of Numenor, which I just finished reading, Brian Sibley, the editor, included 2 chapters from The Lost Road, which depicts a conversation between Elendil and his son, who is, in this book, given a different name because it's an earlier version, but it's really essentially Isildur. And after having read these chapters, I also feel really confident in Isildur's characterization so far, so I was really happy with that. We didn't get a ton of screen time with most of these major characters so far, I think because of how many different plots were happening at once, but I'm really looking forward to seeing more from each of these characters. I was also really surprised by how much I loved the original characters, especially Adar and Arondir. Like, they were the highlight of the show for me, especially Adar. A revival of the Tolkien fandom. To me, this has been the best part of the show. It's almost like, what if the real Rings of Power were the friends we made along the way? And I think that's like, it's a meme, it's funny, but it's so true. I've had so much fun discussing each episode, each character, every little detail of the plot, the series as a whole. And I know these conversations are going to get better and better as the series continues. There's been there's friendly conversations, there's friendly debates, there's everything in between. And all of it has just been such a joy to me. I've loved seeing all of the artwork, music, memes, fan fiction, and just general creative efforts that have been inspired by the series so far. And it's crazy to think of how much more there's going to be, I imagine, by the end of season 5. I've also received dozens of messages from people who have really felt drawn into Tolkien's world from the series so far, and that they're picking up the books for the first time, which I believe is the main goal of an adaptation. So I'm really pleased with that. Watching with my kids. One of my primary concerns when I learned about this show, 5 years ago, was that it was going to be too adult to watch with my kids. And I was really pleasantly surprised by it in the end. When I went to that first screening in New York, that was like my major fear. Like, what am I going to see on the screen? Am I going to be able to come home and watch this with my kids when it premieres? And I was so happy that I was able to. There were definitely some moments where I had to send them out of the room or kind of subtly skip past it with them, because I always ended up watching the episodes before I watched it with them, because some parts were too scary, a little intense. But I think in general, my oldest child is about 10, and they really enjoyed the season. And I've had so many conversations with my kids about The Lord of the Rings since then that I never would have been able to have, because honestly, my kids know how much I love Tolkien. And so they've all taken a little bit of a rebellious stance and have said that they do not want to read Tolkien yet. So I'm trying not to push it on them. And I know we're going to read the books together as they get older and they become interested on their own. But they have devoured this series. They've loved it. We have had so many conversations about Sauron and Morgoth in particular that I never would have expected. And so it's just been such a joy. But getting back to it, I really appreciated how chaste the show was and has been so far. And I think it was really honoring to Tolkien's legacy in this way. Like, you still have romance, there's kissing, there's a lot of tension, but it's done very tastefully. I appreciate how it doesn't cheapen Tolkien in this way. A Catholic perspective. Because I myself am Catholic, and a lot of what we do at Tea with Tolkien is kind of inspired by Catholicism, and we know that Tolkien himself was Catholic as well, I wanted to highlight my experience of the show from a more directly Catholic perspective. Now, I totally respect your opinion if you gave The Rings of Power a try and you felt like it wasn't for you. There were some narrative decisions that I feel deviated from my own expectations. There were characters who I simply didn't connect with or found annoying. And there were some themes that I felt really missed the mark in terms of bringing Tolkien's philosophy to life, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But for me personally, the positive elements of the show have so far dramatically outshone the issues that I have had. So I'm really looking forward to continuing to see where the show takes me. Maybe a lot of these issues are going to be course-corrected in time, and maybe they won't, but I don't know. But if you're someone who's not interested in waiting around to find out, I don't think that anyone should feel ostracized or attacked for just simply not enjoying a particular form of Tolkien-derived media. Like, that's fine. I don't like the Hobbit movies personally, and I think we should all be okay with that. It's okay to say if you didn't like the show. Like, art is subjective, and everyone is going to enjoy or not enjoy or interpret things differently. And I would really hope that the showrunners have the humility to understand this. But I also feel that if you're going to speak publicly on a large platform about something, you should be coming to the table having done your research. It's honestly embarrassing to me as a Catholic to see Catholics calling the show trash, while in the same breath admitting that they haven't even watched a second of it. Like, doesn't that feel silly? I just don't understand how... I just don't understand. There's so much to engage with from a Catholic perspective when it comes to the Rings of Power, and there's a lot of great conversations to be had one way or another, and I haven't seen a lot of this coming from the larger Catholic media. I just want to emphasize that we don't have to reduce ourselves to clickbait culture wars. I know it doesn't earn ad revenue very easily, but we can do hard things. We can discuss things with nuance. It's not 100% perfect, but it's not 100% trash either. Like, as with almost everything, it's going to be in the middle. Now, considering how important Tolkien's faith was to him and this great intellectual tradition of Catholics throughout the ages, I really just expect more. And I know I'm not a professional debater or philosopher, so I'm not going to be as good at putting my thoughts together as others might be, but I think there's merit in trying. And I've been really grateful for the opportunities I've had to speak about the way my faith has impacted my enjoyment and understanding of the show so far. And I would just love to see other Catholics sharing their perspectives as well. So if you're a Catholic content creator or writer or, YouTuber, I would just be really interested in hearing your perspective if you've actually been willing to engage with the series so far. I've seen a lot of people setting up the Rings of Power like it's some kind of morally dangerous, like big scary thing. And in the end, I want to emphasize that Tolkien's Legendarium is not sacred scripture. And I don't see this series as any kind of attack on Tolkien himself or his Christian faith. In my opinion, it's an opportunity to engage with these massively important themes like mortality, redemption, vengeance, loss, the machine, the inherent value of life as it comes up in Galadriel's conversation with Adar. Like, these characters are flawed, they make mistakes, and they reap the consequences. Some of the consequences, maybe they haven't come yet, but they're coming. There's plot, there's character growth, there's catastrophe, and there's eucatastrophe. And if this series poses a danger to your soul because of these things, then I would argue that so does the Silmarillion, and I feel like that's just an absurd thing to say. Like, I feel like that sounds so silly, and I would just encourage people to reflect on this silliness. Especially when compared to other fantasy shows that are out there right now, this is by far the most compatible with your typical Catholic family values that I've seen in ages. So if you're considering giving the show a try, I would recommend watching at least the first 3 episodes before making up your mind, because there is a lot of setup that happens in the first 2 episodes, but things start going kind of crazy in episode 3. So that's just my recommendation. Now, I want to talk about my 2 major issues from a specifically Catholic point of view. If you want to discuss the places where the show did deviate from the philosophy of Middle-earth, let's do that. There are 2 that immediately come to mind as I was watching, and the first is the Mithril origin story that we're told in episode 5. They say that Mithril apparently comes from a Silmaril, which was hidden inside of a tree and then struck by lightning to create a new ore that is as pure and light as good and as strong and unyielding as evil. And this story sets up good and evil as 2 opposing forces, when to Tolkien, evil is the corruption of or the deprivation of good. Evil doesn't exist as its own thing. So I just don't like this. It makes a weird dualism that I don't think works with Tolkien. It also ascribes positive attributes to evil, which bristled me. In fact, this entire Mithril plotline is something that I still can't get on board with, and I generally disliked altogether. Will it be redeemed in the coming seasons? Will it turn out that this whole thing has been a lie orchestrated by Morgoth or Sauron? It's been emphasized as apocryphal in the show and in some interviews, so I'm holding on to hope for this, and I do hope that it doesn't turn out to be true. Now let's talk about the whole touch the darkness thing. The second potential issue that we might take with the show is Finrod's advice to Galadriel when he says, sometimes to find the light, we must first touch the darkness. This follows his little explanation of why a stone can't float while a ship can, which I found really goofy personally. This entire exchange seemed like something that was meant to come across as really profound, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. Now, at first, when the line was initially being used for promotion, it made sense to me that one might have to enter into darkness in order to preserve the light. I immediately thought of Frodo having to enter into what are essentially like the pits of hell in order to destroy the ring. And that's a very Christian and Tolkienian concept, to have to succumb to death, let death swallow you up in order to bring about new life. But as the show begins to unfold, especially when we arrive at Sauron's manipulation of Galadriel as Finrod, they did lose me a bit. Touch the darkness coming from Sauron, paired with his allegedly non-romantic marriage proposal, seems to twist the meaning into something more like, you need to partner with the darkness in order to preserve the light. And this, of course, is Sauron's entire mode of operations in the first half of the Second Age when he's trying to seduce the elves. So it totally makes sense coming from him. But then I'm left wondering, why would Finrod have said this all the way back in the Years of the Trees? Are we meant to discern two different meanings from this line? I think that's possible, but it's just one of those things that makes less sense the more I think about it. Again, maybe this will be resolved further down the line, but for now I'm just left scratching my head. And I think if you take it too far, I can see how this would be, maybe you would say, like a bad moral of the show. These are really my two biggest issues with the series as it's been presented so far. And if it turns out that these are both lies or distortions of Sauron, I will be so happy. But if it's meant to be true in universe, I would really recommend the writing team tread more carefully when it comes to Tolkien's understanding of evil. Now let's get into my more particular Season 1 criticisms. While I have really enjoyed the show so far and the experiences that have stemmed from it, I do have some smaller criticisms to offer in hopes that the show will continue to improve and grow into the masterpiece that I think it deserves to be. So let's talk about the little things. I just have these are just little quibbles. Why is Nori named Eleanor? Why do we have two dwarves alive named Durin? Where is Celeborn? And what's in Halbrand's little necklace pouch, and how did he end up on the raft? These are all things that I'd really like to see answered as the show moves on, but they also don't kill the show for me. There were a lot of small changes made within Peter Jackson's films that I didn't necessarily agree with, or questions I was left with, but I was still able to enjoy them quite a lot. So for me, these are similar issues on a similar scale. I also have a small issue with Durin's joke about the elves taking a blank. Completely pulled me out of Middle Earth, and I really hope the writers don't feel like they need to make similar jokes in the future. Like, Tolkien was good enough about writing humor that he didn't need to make jokes about going to the bathroom. I don't know, I just felt really crude. And where they were really respectful of Tolkien's legacy in terms of the romance and like how chaste the show was, I felt like this was almost a bit disrespectful. Another small thing, this is like I don't know if anyone in the world cares about this, but I do. It bothered me a lot when Halbrand is standing above Adar and he's holding his spear and he stands on him in a Saint Michael pose. That really felt like a subversion of the imagery, and it felt like a betrayal of the audience. I don't really know how to explain it, but in that moment, I was like, oh, there's this subtle imagery here pointing to, Halbrand being a good guy standing over the devil, because it's the Saint Michael. I don't know how to explain it, but it just felt like they did us dirty with that one. If I were ever able to talk to the showrunners again, I would just like to hear their reasoning behind this, because I understand they were going for deception, but just for me, this felt too far. Disjointed writing. A lot of the dialogue felt disjointed, like it had been divided up into different group projects and taken in varying directions without one overarching vision. So I would kind of hope moving forward that things could feel more cohesive in terms of dialogue, because we had so many really, really beautiful and profound moments, and then so many moments that just fell so flat for me that it kind of felt like a roller coaster watching each episode. Much of the season's storyline felt very contrived to me too. It felt kind of painfully obvious that the showrunners were like, we needed to get Galadriel to Numenor, so we're working backwards to figure out how to get her there, but we also need to arrange a meet-cute with Sauron in the middle of the ocean. And so it just felt, to me, goofy. I'm willing to work with this and to be along for the ride for the most part, but having Galadriel jump from the boat, which she shouldn't have been on in the first place, it just felt silly to me. And I still don't understand what the Harfoots are doing there and what they have to add to the story. This is obviously not meant to be disrespectful to anyone who's working on the show. I think all of the cast members did a really great job with their storyline. I don't see the vision for the Harfoots. I don't really enjoy this plot line. Sauron's redemption. One of the best parts about this show is its presentation of this ambiguously repentant Sauron. We know from the text that he did have a period of repentance before ultimately falling back into the methods of Morgoth, but that this transition was something that occurred over a long period of time. With the implementation of time compression, as they're using in the show, we're seeing that all of this is happening over the course of maybe a few weeks. And because of this, I don't think it hit quite as hard as it really should have, and it was kind of a bummer, even though it was still really cool. Galadriel as an unreliable narrator? This isn't something so much of a criticism, but just a thought. I noticed Galadriel's narration in the prologue fails to mention any Noldoran crimes or criminal motivations, and yet she speaks with Halbrand of needing to redeem her bloodline. This is one example of where it felt like they were drawing directly from the source material when it was convenient for dialogue, but choosing to simplify or shift things when they need to fit their new storyline, and it makes the show feel a little bit disjointed, as I was mentioning earlier. I definitely want to recognize that I know it's very tricky to balance creating something for Silmarillion fans, for example, as well as something that's going to appeal to a broad audience. So this is a situation I would not want to be in. Like, I don't envy everyone working on the show because I think it's a very hard balance to find. But it just felt a little bit odd to me. I also felt a lot of the story was sacrificed for the sake of the big reveal in episode 8. It was definitely an incredible scene. It's something that is going to live in my mind forever, but I don't know if it was necessary to set up the stranger as kind of a distraction and, lead us to think he's Sauron the whole time, only for the big reveal to happen. And, I felt like a lot of the other storylines were sacrificed because of it, and it was kind of a bummer. Why Halbrand? As much as I have a particular fondness for Halbrand, I don't understand why he was necessary as an original character. The showrunners said they were inspired by this idea of a pre-existing relationship between Sauron and Galadriel, and I like that idea. I think we should explore that. But they already have a pre-existing relationship in the Second Age, and that's when Sauron is presenting himself as Annatar when they're both in Eregion. So I don't understand the need to create a human Halbrand when Annatar is right there, unless the entire point is just to deceive the audience. Like, you want to have them flirt a little bit, a tense relationship. Like, all of these things could have happened in Eregion with Annatar, and it's hidden there right in between the lines, and I love that. I don't know why the need to create a human character for Galadriel to go on all of these adventures with and to fight alongside and to bond with in like this very specific way. I don't get it. I think the story loses some of its charm by bending so far out of its way to create this new dynamic when there was already a kind of cool dynamic there that could have been explored. Maybe this was an issue of rights, but the more I think about this series, the more tired I get of this excuse that they don't have the rights to do X, Y, and Z. I hope that they're telling the story they want to tell. Haladriel, Saurondriel. Let's talk about that dynamic. Well, honestly, I love the Haladriel dynamic. I actually hated it, like deeply hated it for the majority of season 1. But then, you know what? I don't know what happened. A switch went off in my brain, and now I love it. I don't know how to reconcile this new guilt and these consequences that are going to be attributed to Galadriel because of this dynamic that they created. Like, nowhere in the text does it say that Galadriel unwittingly, physically, or emotionally encourages Sauron to return to power. This is definitely a case where there's a lot of blank space to fill in, but I feel like it's a mistreatment of her character to do this. Galadriel doesn't deserve this level of guilt. It also suggests that Sauron might have lived happily ever after in Numenor without her intervention, which can't possibly be true. So I don't understand the point of this. It's also a little bit weird to have Galadriel believing her husband is likely dead, but she didn't pursue him with the same amount of fervor that she's over here pursuing Sauron with. But I'm not a marriage counselor, so I don't know what's going on with her and Celeborn. I'm also confused about where he is. What's going on with their daughter? Has she been born yet? I don't know, but I'm not necessarily losing sleep over it. It's just puzzling. The fact that there was obviously meant to be some kind of romantic situation alluded to between Halbrand and Galadriel has been pretty obvious from the get-go, from the infamous rom-com teaser to Halbrand being referred to Galadriel's love interest in the press, all the way down to the dialogue, the music, even the heavy-breathing subtitles. Like, for this to all have been set up very carefully and deliberately, and then to see it being denied or backtracked in various interviews after the finale has been very annoying and has, in my opinion, contributed to a weird hostility towards Galadriel's within the fandom. And I found this really toxic and just irritating. At the end of the day, if you're going to sit down and you're going to write some kind of romance between Galadriel and Sauron, I think you should own up to it. You can call it a cosmic connection all you want, but it is what it is. I think you owe as much to the fans of the dynamic you've created because you're kind of throwing them under the bus by acting like you didn't do this on purpose. And oh my goodness, they were just accidentally flirting for 8 episodes or 7 episodes because he wasn't in episode 1. Like, I think that's silly and I think it's a little bit frustrating. So I would just hope moving forward that we could have a little bit of honesty in these conversations and in these interviews. Like, if you're going to write something, I think you should stand behind it. And if you can't stand behind it, you shouldn't write it. Major takeaways. In the end, it's really hard to judge a story based off of the first chapter. And I want to emphasize that over and over again because I know how much has gone into this production so far. And I know that I really only have one small piece of the puzzle. So I'm trying to offer the same kind of grace that I know I would hope others would offer me. I also see this show as a new version of Tolkien's myth rather than an extension of what he wrote. It's really fun to see this new interpretation, even though it is different in some ways, and I'm sure it will be different in other ways going down the roads, and that's to be expected. I personally view The Rings of Power as something that's more akin to fan fiction than a direct adaptation, but I feel like that's a very muddy distinction that I'm not quite sure how to articulate. But I'm deeply invested in the show, and I hope it succeeds in telling the story it set out to. I'm excited to see where they're going. I hope they do it well, and I hope they do it in a way that honors the original work in the end. I don't think we'll really be able to say one way or another until, season 5 is wrapped and the whole thing is over. I don't see their vision for a lot of this, and I don't understand the full picture like they do. I think it's easy for the showrunners to feel confident in their own designs and their own plans because they have all of the answers. They know the ending. But I think they and everyone involved in the show needs to remember to be charitable to those who are still skeptical of the show because, unlike you, I don't know everything that's happening. And so I almost feel like a Numenorian. I'm like a blind trust is being required of me. So that's the position that I'm in. All of my criticisms are being made with love and genuine concern for the show. It's disheartening when I hear flippant responses to criticisms in interviews. Like, there are a lot of people who don't like the show for racist motivations, but not everyone who is upset with the show, or has criticisms is racist. Like, I think it's ridiculous to try and paint people in that light. There are a lot of people who wanted to, 100% love the show, wanted it to be a masterpiece, and felt like there were issues with it. So I would just hope that these kind of more moderate responses are being listened to. There are definitely a lot of people who are going to hate the show no matter what, but I hope that doesn't lead to Amazon tuning out the people who really do love the show and want to love it, but also have some thoughts on it. And these are, again, just my personal thoughts. Take it or leave it, but I thought it would be fun to share a review, not necessarily a review, more just like a reflection on my experiences, because I suppose they've been a bit different than others, so it might be something that's interesting for others to listen to. At this point, this review is getting quite long, so I'm going to wrap things up here, but I really appreciate you listening. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can find me at teawithtolkien.com or at teawithtolkien on, the various social media platforms. So thanks again for listening, and I will see you in our Discord. You can join our free Discord by visiting teawithtolkien.com/Discord.